Thanks for the introduction. Appreciate it. I am a technical solutions architect with Cisco. I still don't really know what that means, but it mainly means that I'm a product specialist, and I work with many different products within Cisco. What makes me kind of qualified to talk up here is I've worked with many different organizations. So getting into that, like, what I'm going to talk about up here may not exactly apply to your organization, so take the little bits. And a lot of this is kind of fundamental stuff. So this is a small knit group, so feel free to ask questions as we go through it. Would be happy to address them as we go through it. What's the key driver of cloud business, digital transformation, right? Obviously, I kind of associate it with a buzzword, but it's true. And most companies are in a different position as they transform their business into the cloud, and that could be moving their applications into a SaaS, basically, type of model. But this is the key driver of it. One of the neat things in being with Cisco, I worked with a smaller company that was acquired by Cisco, and now I'm in this larger company, and I think Cisco is actually driving a lot of this for our customers. So probably don't need to explain this to you, and you guys already know this is fundamental stuff, but I think it's good to start here. So how IT was built, obviously there was a fortress, all the apps, infrastructure, everything was basically set up, and there was a perimeter. And it made, you could build up the walls pretty high there, but and then taking a step back, and Cisco has kind of founded this too as well with the MPLS network. We would funnel all the traffic back to a central location. You connect via a VPN. But what we're seeing now, and this has been the case for the last several years, is internet's a lot cheaper to pipe it out. So for branch offices, especially with the adoption of SD-WAN, we're seeing a lot of applications being moved to the cloud, and we also see those branch offices going to the cloud. And also the remote workforce, 50% of it in a survey that I'll pull up in a second, we found that most people are not connecting to the VPN. You don't have to, and actually I don't connect to the VPN for work unless I need to check my email. So think about this. What is your cloud strategy? And the answer to that might be, my organization may not even be going to the cloud yet. I was talking to someone last night who was still trying to figure out exactly how the organization, for the costs for them they've spent a lot of money on the infrastructure that they had for, their cloud service, but it wasn't really an adoption for them. Now, other organizations I've worked with are leading cloud, they're putting everything in the cloud, right? So think about it from your perspective, what makes sense. 10, 15 years ago, I would say probably 10 years ago, everyone was like, cloud is going to rule the world, and a lot of that is sort of true, but what we really see today is a hybrid world, right? Where we see some applications on-prem and we see some in the cloud. So you'll see a couple of these slides, and I just wanted to kind of spice up this information here. So we partnered with Enterprise Strategy Group, which is a market research firm. They do consulting, and basically we partnered with them to do some market research on some of the things that we're working on with Cisco. And I pulled out a couple key things here, but in one of the survey questions, it basically asked, what do you see in terms of a timeline of your infrastructure moving to a SaaS-based model? And what I thought was surprising is that 32% report that the majority of the apps are in SaaS today. It's expected to increase 60% in the next 2 years. And I can see a lot of that. Even from a cloud perspective, we're getting a lot of application security. So how do I protect the cloud from an application standpoint? So in a nutshell, the way we've changed, the way we work has changed, and this shouldn't be surprising to anyone. But really, where the talk today is centered around is how do we protect or get visibility into all these different facets, right? Or even if you do get visibility into all those facets, how do you manage it, right? And I don't have all the answers for you today, but really kind of giving you some guiding principles to look at. And I know that it's really hard for me to talk about it I won't go into any product specifics, but it is hard for me to talk about without talking about what kind of Cisco is doing as a whole. So users and apps have adopted the cloud, but that means that we also need to move our security controls into the cloud too as well, or most of them, right? So it'd be a hybrid approach, right? And most of the organizations that I work with usually have 5,000 users or more. Basically are working with over 50 different security vendors. So how do you apply a single correlated policy across 50 different vendors, right? It's tough. It's really tough. And so what we're kind of seeing in some of the market research that we did is that there is a consolidation of wanting to get vendors to do more within the single application, right? Not one vendor is going to solve every problem, but trying to consolidate that to make it easier to manage. So, some of the key concerns in security, if these probably aren't surprising to any of you, but I would say out of all of these right here, visibility is one of the key things to look at. Specifically, how do you see what applications people are utilizing within your environment? How do you see what people are doing off the network when they're not connected to the VPN? And then being able to manage policies, especially if you're regulated. So here's kind of the bulk of what I want to talk about today, and it's really the key pillars of cloud strategy, looking at how you're going to protect users as they connect to the internet, right? So they don't necessarily need a VPN back in. I still work with organizations that always have always-on VPNs, but we're starting to see that kind of go away. But yeah, I mean, and I'll talk about this in a little bit more depth in a second, but how do we secure the users when they're off network? I think about myself in that I'm constantly traveling. I'm sure that many of you travel. I don't really need to connect to my network. Also, and this is kind of the more traditional when you think of cloud security, securing the SaaS applications, the public applications that you have there. So it's really visibility. I see a lot of my customers moving to Office 365. So when they're transitioning and moving into Office 365, how do you get visibility into what's being stored into Office 365? How do you get visibility into what's out in the public? And how do you manage controls? As well as the same thing in public cloud, right? We always hear about S3 buckets that have been left open and wide on the web. So, and along with that, single correlated source of intelligence. So your intelligence is, your products are only as good as your intelligence. Or if you have a really, and this is across the board, if you're maybe a financial institution or something where you have a little bit more resources than most organizations, maybe you're able to write something up. But really, all these controls are, it all drills down to intelligence, right? And surfacing what is important to you. So MFA, I think MFA is one of the easiest things that you can, well, I shouldn't say easiest things, but it is pretty relatively easy. I see the Okta's here. Cisco has our own type of solution too as well. But it's one of the easiest things to help protect your SaaS applications, your applications, and really it plays a bigger part in Zero Trust, which I know a lot of organizations are moving towards. So really, again, this is kind of just a visualization that I put together of on-premise to the cloud, protecting users where they're at, and then in the cloud. And this is kind of what Cisco internally kind of defines as our cloud business unit. And oftentimes I get asked, tell me about cloud or tell me how you're protecting cloud. And a lot of the times it's most organizations are thinking, protecting in the public cloud, but there's a lot more to it than just that. Again, you want to deliver and enforce security controls across branch offices to enabling off-network protection, and also beefing up the security that you have on-prem. All right, so this is one of my favorite parts, and this is a little specific to Cisco, but I think it's one of the interesting things that I look at as an engineer, and it's our intelligence. And you see this across the board with many different vendors, but one of the really neat things about Umbrella, the product that we have, but Cisco in general, is we see traffic from all over the world. We see traffic from, I have everyone from my grandma using our DNS to large corporations and everything in between. We see internet traffic from almost every country that has internet, and really we can look at this data and we can make correlated models based off of those threat factors. So with the intelligence that we utilize on our end, again, tying it back to the intelligence portion of your journey to the cloud, right? And making sure that you can have things that are automated. One of the common things that I hear across almost every organization is, maybe not every organization, but it can be a staffing issue, right? It can be maybe not having expertise in a particular area. So the automation helps out a lot, and intelligence is where you tie that back in. So with Cisco, specifically Talos, which we'll talk about in a second, we have millions of feeds that come in. We analyze data across the globe. We have security researchers that are industry renowned. And actually, I don't know, who here was at the Gartner Summit in London last week? No one? Hugo, nice. But yeah, so you see a lot of the security researchers there, but basically we're taking all of this big data, I'm using so many buzzwords right now, and correlating that across that. So just a little bit about Cisco Talos. It's a lot of people don't know about it. It's not a product within Cisco. It's our security research team. We actually have the largest non-government threat intelligence agency in the world. And the reason for that is Cisco has acquired many different security companies, and it's kind of a culmination of all those security companies together. But a lot of the stuff that they publish is actually free on the web. So I don't know if anybody follows the Cisco Talos blog, but a lot of the information that they do publicly post on that. And if you read a lot of the security blogs, they're typically mentioned quite a bit. All right, so how do we take that information and how do we apply it to how do we take that global intelligence and apply it to a security platform? So we want to prioritize and investigate and speed up that response time. I was reading somewhere that security analysts usually have kind of a burnout within a year, probably maybe less than a year, because they're inundated with so many different alerts, right? So how do you prioritize and then figure out what is something that you need to do that? And that could be customizing some of the policies that you have within your cloud platform, also that intelligence. So staying ahead of attacks, looking out for things within your public cloud that might be a risk. Do you have anything that's shared publicly that maybe shouldn't be? And then enriching other systems with the data that you have. So one of the things that I want to talk about, and I know I was hearing a lot at the dinner reception that we had last night, was the shadow IT came up a little bit. And who in the room is concerned about shadow IT? Yeah. Okay. Shadow IT it's been really interesting for me, I think, kind of being in this space for about 8 years. It's really grown, since I started in this. And I think every organization's at different levels of it. You'll see that I have a slide from the market research that 28%, actually I think it's the next slide, of market research, or of organizations feel somewhat confident that they don't have visibility into this. But it is an ever-growing trend as we tie back to the point that I was making earlier about everything moving to the cloud. How do you know what applications are in your environment and how do you protect those? And it's not just us saying that. Obviously, we have Gartner saying that too as well. So the shadow IT reality, and I always think this is fun for me, going into an assessment with a customer. I've probably done about 800 different cloud security risk assessments with organizations. And one of the things that's depends on the organization itself, of course, everything's unique. But I always ask, how many cloud applications do you think are in your environment, right? How many applications do you think are on-prem or reaching out from on-prem? And usually the answer is it depends, but it's usually a couple hundred, right? But usually when I turn on some of our products, we'll see 3,000 applications in there. Or how many cloud storage services do you think are in your environment? It's usually, we use Google Drive or we use OneDrive, and that's kind of what we expect to see. We'll see 30 to 40 different cloud storage, and that presents a huge risk, right? Not that you necessarily want to block those other applications, but you might want to know what people are using. They could be uploading data into that actual application itself. And this is what I was just talking about. So out of the market research. And if anybody's curious on this, we do have a booth over there. I'm happy to share more data on this. I thought it to be pretty fascinating. But yeah, so shadow IT concerns are not as rampant, and I could kind of see that just by the raise of hands in here, right? So I would say probably a third of you raised your hands. But the risk is real, and I'm sure that you guys are aware of that. At least getting visibility into the applications that people are utilizing. So another part of that survey from ESG, what are basically we asked, I think around 450, a group of your peers, and we asked, what is the biggest potential risk that you see with shadow IT? And the two most popular responses to that were potential for sensitive data to be moved to SaaS applications without the proper controls or oversight, risk of data loss from low security apps and or improperly configured controls. And I see this all the time. I used to work in U.S. public sector, and I worked with a lot of K-12 schools, which have like no budget, no really anything, and they don't have the luxury of a lot of different things. But in my findings with them, a lot of the time what we'd see, and I see this across organizations too as well, is with users accidentally leaving things public on the web. So an example of that for one of the schools that I was working with is one of the schools was scanning, they're going on a trip, they're scanning in passports. The teacher, by no fault of his own or her, put those passports in a public folder, right? And so you could actually Google and find it, but that link was public on the web, right? I found organizations that I've worked with where, using a cloud storage service where they had some of their IP that was actually on a public link, right? So it's mainly getting the visibility into. Now I'm kind of touching on CASB a little bit if you guys are picking up what I'm saying, but it's really touching and getting that visibility into what applications are being utilized, right? From those applications, what applications are the ones that maybe I want to look into? I think shadow IT doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. If I'm paying for a subscription with one provider, but I see a majority of my users are using another, maybe there's a reason for that, right? So maybe I need to figure out what's going on there. And this is kind of the methodology that at least I adopt, and it depends on the organization, really depending on how you're regulated. But tracking shadow IT to create a culture of acceptance and protection instead of detection punishment. So there are some organizations that I work with that want to constantly block everything. We just want to block everything except for OneDrive. And the reality of that is that's just like kind of a whack-a-mole game. Like it's a never-ending cycle. It will never end. So it's really kind of figuring out, okay, how do I get visibility into things? But then how do I educate users, right? How do I educate users on what they should be utilizing? And I'll give an example of that in a second. But also, how do I decide what's risky and what's not, right? So maybe Box or OneDrive or Google Drive are okay, but some of these other risky, unknown applications for cloud storage would not be. So maybe I can enable policies to automatically block those, or at least pop those up in incidents. And I think of one of the key things here. So I worked for OpenDNS. We were acquired by Cisco. We didn't have like an app discovery report at the time or a shadow IT report in our product. But I remember we had a subscription to Box, but nobody ever used Box. We'd actually use Dropbox, their competitor. And it wasn't until a little bit later until we had actually a report and they started looking into it. We were a small organization at the time. That our IT department came to us and said, hey, we have a subscription to Box, like, please use it, right? So it wasn't until they started getting visibility into that, and it was just really an education to users, right? That it still didn't block the other cloud storage service, but it's really getting visibility into what people are utilizing. So what we're doing at Cisco, I think is really neat, and it keeps me pretty excited, is we're moving a lot of these traditional things that you would see on-prem, and this is kind of tying back to the beginning of the presentation. We're moving a lot of these applications into the cloud so you can have a single correlated source to push out policies. And those could be things such as a firewall. So we're working up the full stack, no matter where the user's at and where your remote office is. A lot of what we're seeing too is with advance of SD-WAN, we're seeing a lot of branch offices going direct to internet. So it's how do you secure those where maybe those sites only have 5 to 10 people, right? And you don't want to put it'd be really expensive to put a full firewall there, even though you could argue that you need it. So I like this quote. I know it is kind of a marketing quote, but it's not just us saying that what we're building is called a secure internet gateway, and we're traditionally used to a secure web gateway. This is going to cover the full stack, and it's going to be able to cover the full stack for branch offices and remote users. And these are some of the controls that we're building in. And it's not just us, too, right? So you're seeing a lot of, like I said, the security market, organizations are asking for more simplicity. And I think everyone knows here security is very complicated, especially with all the vendors that you have. So you're seeing a lot of organizations kind of move to this model where you're able to apply firewall capabilities, layer 3, layer 4, layer 7 capabilities, wherever they're at. So with that said, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. I'll be at the booth. I'll hang around here for a little bit. If there are any questions right now, feel free to ask.